right, well, I believe there are 6 of us, so we're going to go ahead and get started. There's Mr.
Oh, he's back there, yeah.
Mr. Kane in the back. So we have,
You can bring it with you.
so I'd ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll.
A special session has been called for Thursday, February 19, 2015 at 5 o'clock p.m. in the 5th floor conference room of the Municipal Office Building for the County Administrator's quarterly report, followed by the planning and zoning process and special projects. Roll call. Maddox.
Here.
Kane.
Here.
Markley.
Here.
Walters.
Here.
Philbrook.
Here.
Walker. Townsend. McKiernan.
Here.
Regia. Holland.
Here. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over directly to Doug Bach for the quarterly reports. For those of you here at the meeting or in public, we have asked our administrator to do quarterly reports and updates as a part of the evaluation process. So instead of just doing this once a year, but actually doing it quarterly so we can stay informed on the initiatives that are working. It's been a good process so far, and this is the first one of the new year. So, Mr. Bach, we turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, Commission. Quarterly report for this time is for the time frame the last quarter of 2014. As you recall, the last report it went through was rather lengthy. I tried to tie it to the goal setting that was done out for me, and we kind of moved through section by section. I believe after we went through the evaluation, I worked it a little bit at this point to narrow it down to activities that occurred. It still kind of follows the mode of how my goals are set out, but it's not really laid out by section. It just kind of runs through the different areas that are called for in my goals. However, I'll also note that in our strategic planning session at the end of last year or toward that time, you gave me the direction to start working more toward the measurable goals, but I can't really fit those into the quarterly report yet because we're just getting those through standing committee and they're coming on. So this may evolve more, and we can work with that as to so that I'm producing what makes sense for you to hear. So this quarterly report is really one that I will say it falls under the different project areas that you've laid out for me in goals and what's happening in each of those areas. But you'll probably be happy to hear too that it's probably down about 25, 30 pages from the last PowerPoint. So I think it kind of gets right down to it as to what's going on. First area is under public safety. So I note the major activities that happen under each area. You know, we appointed a new police chief, which was a major one for that area, started the first of the year. We've started our fire study. We brought the firm in that's now starting to conduct some interviews about setting up their process. We provided support to the Public Safety Hiring Task Force. This has really been a major undertaking for our HR department and what's going on in this area. Sheriff Department's labor contract and working with the sheriff to negotiate that to a new level, which will be a major savings for us in overtime this year. And then we had changes to our small animal ordinance. Infrastructure, our 2015 CNIP schedule was completed through the governing body, so each commissioner was able to identify their projects for the coming year. Completion of Safe Routes to School grant that is in place. Projects completed in 2014, so while these happened all year, completions come in the last quarter of the year, so I guess that's the quarter we really get to take credit for them. I don't know that I need a list through each one, and we'll make sure you all have a copy of the PowerPoint, but State Avenue from 82nd to 94th Street completed, the Merriam Lane reconstruction first segment. I'm not going to read down each one of these, but I did want to make note of that. And then the last one, you know, is $11 million worth of sanitary sewer projects throughout the city. And this is kind of one of those unseen expenditures, and we spend a lot of money in water pollution, but this happens, it's underground, and we never know about it, but if we don't do it, things don't flow. Projects getting started in that period, 98th Street to State Avenue to France Family Drive that one was underway, but that's really just the planning for that S-curve. Oak Grove Road, 53rd to 55th Street, Upper Connor Creek. Yeah, been a long time coming, right, Commissioner? Upper Connor Creek Sewer Extension, Sewer Rehab Program to Brenner Heights, and then Minnesota Avenue, the 7th to 8th Street. There was a public meeting on that earlier this week in coordination with the investments in that project area downtown. In areas of customer service, Treasurer's Office, we've had a few initiatives in place. The continued expansion of the queue system for getting in place to go through that. Adding staffing to that area has made a significant difference. It really has been a point of trying to get fully staffed for the provisional employees that we have in place. And we've extended our hours from time to time. Now, I know we still have some issues to deal with, and I've had recent reports on people still trying to get title work and being a couple hours out and trying to make it happen. Though I can say I have walked in and found people on title reports and they told me they did it in 25 minutes, but my most recent report on it wasn't so positive. But we have made significant progress in that area. It'd be better tested as we move through the year with all the staffing in place, because that's when we get more busy. Parks and Recreation had some interesting numbers from the last year in terms of our sports. The youth soccer programs went from 2013 numbers where we had 336 to 578. In youth volleyball, 2013 we had 27. It moved up to 70 different groups and then 70 teams. In youth flag football, we literally went from having 0 leagues in operation in 2013 to 75 in operation in 2014. So parks became much more active in the community, getting out there with recreational programming. We also saw increases in our adult programs as well. HR revamped our customer service program. This was the training we did with KU. They've gone through the training, and now we're rolling that out to our employees, so we're pretty excited about how that whole program will come about, the philosophies that they'll be teaching. You know, we've had good examples as they've talked through about how people see people on a daily basis. We don't know what somebody's going through. You know, they can have all kinds of personal issues or not when they come forward. And as employees of the government, when we're serving them, we just have to be open-minded. And there's a strong message that comes out. I probably could have HR come in and show the example of what they're doing to you all if you would like. But it's a good program that KU has helped us out with, and as we roll this out through all the different areas of the government. You're all aware, I had the presentation on the police department's Courtesy First Safety Always program. So that went into operation about a week and a half ago. And then that came before standing committee as we start to set out the goals for that program. Active shooter training is ongoing really through the employees, and I think we've rolled it into most areas. And then the Heart Safe program, we continue to work with that and making sure our employees are trained in the CPR training. In areas of innovation, we have under contract for our new CAD RMS system. This is what our dispatch area and records management that comes out through the police department. That should be put in through this year, you know, with the contract going in place. Our data dashboard that you received updates on, our presentation from our technology department. So that is now one that is expanding through the government, where our different departments can learn to use this, and we can start to put together meaningful dashboards for allowing reports back to the governing body members. I don't know if any of you are into the Link system. This is an internal messaging system that we put in the last quarter of 2014. So it's kind of you think we have enough instant messaging around with our email and the phones we're carrying, but this is really kind of that text messaging over the computer where you can send a quick note or instant message back and forth. It's rolled out in some areas. I currently use it within my inter-office area, and it has worked. I'm using it probably more than I thought I would, so it is being effective because I somewhat get inundated with email, so this system kind of keeps that messaging going on. We did a new safety features on our check warrant stock. This was critical for the safety of checks we would issue out, though we are going a lot to electronic. We still needed to advance over to this area. And our accounting department led the way in this area along with payroll. Staff participation in the digital summit held at the Kaufman in January, and then department goals are presented at standing committee meetings well, the measurable goals are starting to be done, and you'll continue to see those actively presented more and more. Economic development activities, we completed the CSL study on the convention center. Public levy demolition activity for redevelopment in that area was actively underway. Phase 2 Village West apartments groundbreaking. Schlitterbahn retail projects began with the dirt work out there next to 435. We started doing the environmental abatement in Indian Springs, so that project can move further along toward either a redevelopment or demolition. Wyandotte Plaza continued the development. As you can see, the PetSmart name is now up in front of one of the stores, and I think the Marshall store is almost to that point next to it, and I believe we're going to have a donut shop open up pretty quick here in Krispy Kreme. J.E. Dunn moved forward with their facility down along K32. We initiated the master plan for the Rosedale area along with KU Hospital and KU Med. Our Fairway North Shopping Center was approved to move forward. Some housing development projects that have moved through planning and zoning. These aren't ones that we've had as much interaction with through our office. They're just ones that are happening in our community. We're starting to see more of those come about. We advanced a new 3-year NRA program. Really the activity that happened in the last quarter of 2014 was getting out to all the different taxing entities, the school districts, community college, presenting what was going on, getting them all on the same page with where we were from our standing committee activity, and then of course moving forward at getting that final approval this year and then approval for the Attorney General to get our program in place. And one that I think I can put in every quarterly report, we updated our LIHTC policy. In housing, we had some changes to the CDBG program for financial support formulas. Education and workforce, we have staff support going to the Workforce Development Committee and to the Employment Consortium and MAMTech. In transportation, excuse me, we modified some extended transit routes. I believe those of you that are on the committee, Mr. Welke came forward to that committee from transit, talked about how we had changed a few areas where we had buses that overlapped on certain areas where we could swing them around. So really at no cost or minimal cost, we were able to add blocks into different areas, pick up different people. For the first time, that I'm aware of, we actually have one of our routes that does a swing over into Missouri and then comes back into the Fairfax area. So where people are working or moving back and forth. So we've really had a lot of progress in that area without a lot of cost. I mean, you're aware of the route we changed early in the year in Rosedale. These were just changes and modifications throughout the city, all the way from the eastern edge all the way out to accessing the new Village West apartments with relatively no cost to that operation. And we're continually working in that area to develop new methods of financial support, hoping that our new ATA transit director can come up with some good ideas for us. Healthy communities, recreation, we implemented the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Fit-tastic, thank you, Mayor, program, and assisted with the Enroll Wyandotte program for the federal health care initiative. So that was a major undertaking assisted by our aging department. In terms of environment, we advanced in water pollution control, CSO master plan and projects, authorized storm and wastewater education campaign. I believe that was brought forward to standing committee as well. Those go forward to help with the pending consent decree. But and also there are good aspects going on in the community. In terms of personnel, in addition to the customer service programs that we have the health assessment participation increased by over 24% this year. So very excited about that. You know, I think, and you've heard me, I've contended that I've had great frustration with here because the carrot method has never worked for us. We offer the gift card to people and we were not getting them to sign up. And I felt like maybe we have to come in with a little bit more of the stick program, which I've heard many other communities talk about being successful. But our HR department continued to do a fantastic job, worked hard here, and made a major increase in this area. Adopted the incentive to move to the high deductible health care plan, and the incentive that went into that place this year, we saw an increase from 135 to 305 employees, so that's the largest increase we've seen in that program since it's been in place, showing, I think, getting that out there will demonstrate to all our employees that this is a better deal for them. And it's also one that will enable our healthcare program to save more money over the years to come. Non-union performance evaluations were put in last year, so we did those evaluations were conducted during the fourth quarter, and then the implementation of, again, this year, and getting the union groups that don't have them put in place for this year, so they will have goals to meet. That is still a process underway. Appointments, I mentioned one, but other big appointments, we had a new Parks and Recreation Director appointed, and then our purchasing manager in Sharon Reed. So there's been a mix, and there's many other appointments that were made throughout the year, but I'll just note that it's probably a mix between internal people and then bringing in some outside people that have added a fresh perspective, new perspectives to some of our departments. I showed you this chart last time, and I'll just reinforce I'm filling the 3 assistant county administrators. My emphasis here is that I elevated the role of the assistant county administrator, eliminated really where's the deputy position by putting these 3 in place, that they will have more decision making, more able to able to move and act on more items in a quicker fashion. I'm about to finish this last position of the assistant county administrator. Should have an announcement for that in the next week. In the area of finance, we took the CMIP schedule to standing committee. This was the first time we'd taken in that fashion in the fall to go back through and talk about what projects had been completed 2014, 15, and then a separate meeting to come forward to the committee and talk about what was going to be done in the out years. And I think it's really getting a good handle on those out years as we come in and look at this coming year to make sure we have a plan for each year going forward that's realistic that we can meet, because we know we can't go from a $14 million CMIP schedule and bond issue and then jump up to 22. We're not going to hit that level, but we have to do something that's sustainable for the operations of our government. So it was good for the committee to kind of work on that outside of the budget time and really offer some good input back to staff. So as they're preparing CMIP work now for this coming budget process, they've had that insight. Preparation for the bond and note sale, you see that activity as it comes through the commission. In fact, we moved through for approvals in this quarter, but this was just prep stuff that came through. Takes a lot of work by our finance department. Very notable to be on this schedule. We did a refinancing of the 1999 Speedway bonds, which provides an estimated savings of $2 million in that bond issue. Authorized projects, well, then the next step, the bond and note, was authorizing the projects that would actually be put in that. And then we implemented lease financing for multi-department equipment purchases, which is another big undertaking. The last area note up here, and I would appreciate any other input you would have, but we have tried to continually work on commission communication. It's really fall under one number probably than multiple, but that's how we have it listed. Commission liaison in place, really to be there available to you to communicate with, allow communication with the government, communication with me, interaction on projects or things that you want to make sure you're aware of. The weekly notes, I've tried to keep those meaningful as to actionable items going on that week, and really have hit a point if I didn't feel like there was something that needed to be noted, I don't put it down. Our emergency notification system, continued to send out messages. I think we've used that system a dozen times this year, right, Joe? So here we are in February, so try not to overuse it, try to use it for things that come into play, and it is somewhat of an evaluation, but trying to make sure you're aware of items that would be picking up a lot of attention in the community or in your areas. On-3 settings, I've used this a few times to talk about different projects or activities, so you're up to date on what's going on in those areas. Individual commission meetings to step in and talk through it. And then my administrative staff should make themselves available to you all if you have areas of projects you want to work on, that they're there. So it's not just having to come to me, but I would like to keep that focus to that I have one of myself or one of my administrative staff in meetings that you conduct. That way, if there's something you're looking or an expectation, they'll give you that feedback as to what would be done. That concludes my quarterly report. Mayor, if there are any questions you have from anybody, I'll be happy to stand for those.
I just had a quick question about the health care, the high deductible plan. Did we predict how many people we thought might move as a result of the incentive? Was that more or less than we expected?
I think it was about right at the number. I think we were hoping to get the number up closer to 500. Joe, you might have a better feel for that than I do.
I think that, the incentive has been around for a number of years now, and this is the first year where we've seen a significant jump in that number. Obviously, the jump this year was great, but we certainly would like to see, getting us more toward, a much higher than 300 or so. We'd like to see a lot more move to that plan with the incentive, so.
I don't think we formally set a target. I will say I was probably hoping for more.
Yeah, but again, significant progress in just this 1 year. This is the 4th year or so for the incentive, so I think people are starting to understand it, and they're starting to understand the benefit up to them as well as
Well, and
us.
hopefully the employees, for all you employees out there, hopefully those of you who have taken advantage of it will talk to other employees about how you're using it, because I think some people are just scared off by the idea of trying something new, and if they have a friend or a coworker who's saying, hey, I use this and it's really easy and this is how it works, that might help expand the number as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Yes.
Thank you. Just want to say you've been busy, you've been successful and thus far, and thank you. But I also wanted to ask for clarification on 2 of the things that were mentioned up there. I'm just in the dark on them. I'd like to kind of get an understanding of what the fire study is. I know it said fire study underway, just what the fire study exactly
Okay.
is. And then also the Fairway North Shopping Center, what exactly is that?
Okay. The fire study was the one that the commission directed us to move forward with a couple of years ago, actually, and we funded it into this year. It's really a comprehensive review that started from the initiative to say, well, if we need to put money into certain firehouses, do we have them all located in the right places, and are we performing our services in a way that makes the most sense? And that graduated a little bit more to say, okay, let's take a more comprehensive view of all our operations in the fire department. So we brought in an outside consulting company, Focus, Facets, I'm sorry, thank you. Facets out of Phoenix, and they're going to go through and do an assessment of all aspects of our operation. It's a joint management union relationship going into it. We had the union as part of our committee that set in and helped select this company. So, because we do feel like to be successful, this really has to be a joint relationship in how they go through it. They're just starting to have some interviews with people to talk about how they would go through and do this, but they will look at, what our timing is. They'll look at aspects of what our times are for calls of service throughout the day. They'll look at different things from, what's on fire side versus ambulance side. They'll look at the way we maintain our equipment, the methodology, the relationships we have in our fleet service operation to that. They'll look at what we civilianize, what we don't civilianize, and they'll look at standards of operation, standards of practice that are done on a national level. They'll look at comparable cities, compare those back to us. So it's really a very comprehensive review that we are just getting into with them. It'll take several months to go through, but really have, I think, my office, Mayor, that the fire department and the chief have high aspirations that they're going to come back with some good thoughts for us. Fairway North Shopping Center, that's the project that sits right, well, I say Fairway North, it sits on our southern boundary. It's down right next to KC Joe's, formerly Oklahoma Joe's Barbecue. That's a shopping center that came forth from Lane 4, thank you. Lane 4 brought this forward to do the development there, so they are redeveloping the center. It came through economic development, and it actually has gone to full commission and been approved, so they're going to refinish the store, repurpose it, bring in some higher level tenants that'll come into it. So it should fit into that area and take advantage of what I would say is kind of a rejuvenated area with what's going on and a lot of people that are looking for opportunities.
What store are they gonna redo?
Well, it's a strip mall right now. So they're redoing the whole strip mall. Some tenants I think they'll keep, some tenants, and some are vacant, you know, that they're looking to bring in some new ones.
And this is across the street from Oklahoma Joe.
It's next door is right to the east of it.
It's on the Kansas City, Kansas side.
Okay?
Fairways across the street. I have a question.
Okay.
You mentioned the Treasurer's Department.
Sure.
I guess I have a question regarding the scheduling aspect of it. I had reason recently to discover that in order to get an appointment, you have to go in and show up, and then they give you an appointment time, rather than you being able to call and say, can I have an appointment for tomorrow, and they give you a time. That's 2 trips to either location. What is the compelling reason to prohibit taking making an appointment and then going in the next day with some assuredness that you're not going to be there for 3 hours waiting because you happened to hit a busy day when you showed up, and it's going to be 160 minutes before you can get in and do your work. Whereas if you knew you had to be there at 8:30, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously I'm missing why that is
Well,
not feasible.
it's an evolution of that system that we are working to advance it so we can go to what's online appointments and then maybe move to the next phase. Lou Levin, our Director of Finance, to which Treasury is under, is here, and I think I'll let him answer that in more detail.
Yeah. Right now, an individual does have the option of doing it online, so you can do it from your computer at home. The next
Do
goal,
what?
you can make an appointment online,
I was not aware of that.
and I can send you the link.
No, I believe you.
But you have a very good question. It makes sense is that we want to evolve so an individual can call and make that. What we've talked with 311 to see if we could do it through 311. They would have to have access to the computer to do it. I think we're going to strive towards doing it this year. We don't have a set date and time when we'll have it implemented, though.
Yeah, I think the big point that he points out there is in Treasury today, they don't really have an appointment person, and that natural place for it does work well in 311, and I think it's growing 311 to the system that we always have wanted it to be will be a very easy mode for anybody that you could just punch 311 and get that done. So.
Well, and let me be clear in case there's any doubt. The people I've dealt with in the Treasury Department, both here and at the Annex, have always been very professional, very businesslike, very helpful, from Debbie Pack all the way down to the young clerks that I've never met. It's not the personnel are not treating you correctly. It's just simply that it's pretty hard to tell somebody you got 160 minutes to wait to do a 5-minute transaction. That's,
Yeah,
and
I
you
mean,
cannot, and for the other side of that is you cannot do all these transactions. I understand with renewals, but you cannot do other transactions online. You have to be there physically to present the documents or the license plate or the title work if you're titling a new vehicle. So, thank you.
Any other questions?
I would be interested. I think the program that KU Med spearheaded with customer service was one of the reasons that they went from kind of a bottom tier hospital 20 years ago to being a top tier hospital right now. And that customer service program that they rolled out was cutting edge, state of the art. And I'm very excited that we're using that here. I would love to have a brief presentation for the commission and for the public to see how that rollout's going to go with a timeline and some goals, so we can observe it, because I think it's something we ought to be excited about and something we ought to spread the word about. It's pretty exciting. Also, the police department courtesy program, I would like to hear more about that in a short 5 or 10 minute presentation for the commission, but also for the public, so we can learn more about that as well. I think those are programs that our public's interested in, and certainly programs that our commission's interested in.
Okay, we'll certainly do that. In fact, we brought the one for the customer service in front of our operations team, and I think I've told you this before, but I bring in many of the departments on a weekly basis. We sit down and try to conduct our business in less than an hour of updates in all areas, and then we have special projects like that going on, like HR, and they go through and roll out what happens in a customer service program. So they do have a good, I will say short, but a good little synopsis that kind of runs through how they're doing that. So we'll get that scheduled for a special session. That'll be a good session to come in. On the Courtesy First program, we did bring that before, so I mean,
The idea of it, I'd like a little more detail.
okay, and I think as the chief develops maybe he came forward the other night to your committee with the goals, but he hadn't put as much meat on that goal yet. It was kind of like a projection that we wanted to kind of see through it. So if I give me a few months on that one, I think it might make more sense as we've rolled it out. Then we can talk about how the program's working and some of our immediate survey information that we're getting back.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bach. And if any of the commissioners have any further questions, then I encourage you to reach out, and we will continue. We'll get the next quarterly update scheduled, and just appreciate your work and appreciate the commission's time on this presentation. Yes, sir.
Is it could you send me, I'd like to have your quarterly reports in written form. Maybe I'm getting them and I don't.
I'll do that.
Yes.
If I could just get email's fine. I don't have to have a hard copy.
We'll get it to everyone.
We'll send out that PowerPoint just like it came.
Thank you. All right, so we are ready to move forward with projects, and I'll let Mr. Bach tee this up as well.
All right, the next part of our presentation is in regard to planning and zoning. It's really twofold. The first part has to do with the procedures and the process, and this really has come about because there's some discussion that commissioners had about how things get teed up for planning and zoning. And I will say historically, and dating back to the data consolidation, whenever we've had a planning and zoning related item, and I'm not going to say always, but usually those items always went to the planning commission. They vetted through and worked them, and then they advanced to the governing body. And I think recently we've had a few items that have come forth that started as commission initiatives, and that made sense, and then it went on, and then that kind of, it opened the thought process more, that it made a lot of sense to us that we might want to start doing that more consistently, that we come to a standing committee, have a discussion about a concept or an idea that would traditionally go to planning and zoning, but we start it with the commission, and definitely not get a decision, because you don't want to prejudge anything from that standing committee level. But you can talk about, yeah, this is a good item to work on or to work through, and then send that on to Mr. Richardson, and then he'd work it through planning and zoning. So, Rob, if you want to start with this process and talk through some of your ideas.
Thank you. So I made this chart as simple as I could. Planning and zoning charts can get to look fairly complex and complicated, but basically for internal requests for action, so that if I had an idea, if Doug had an idea, if any of you had an idea about something that we needed to do in terms of planning and zoning, you'd bring that to me, and I would prepare it, the proposal for standing committee. The standing committee would review that, and as we were discussing that, we think there are three things that could go on. If the standing committee was unanimous, that's a great idea, hurrah. everybody's jumping up and down and cheering, we would move that into staff preparation and on to planning commission after that. There might be items that need further discussion, and that maybe the standing committee isn't fully uniform or unanimous on, or if the standing committee feels like it's something that the full commission should discuss before we take additional action. So that's on the top here. We could come up and go to a full commission special session. There are a couple of times when we have to go to the full commission for a vote, and that would be in the case of initiating a large-scale neighborhood zoning action. Some of you saw this at standing committee earlier this month for the 6th Street area. It will be on your agenda next week as part of the planning and zoning agenda, where the Board of Commissioners is the party initiating a change of zone, and that's a requirement of state law. So we would go to develop the proposal, go to standing committee, and then we'd either have the staff prepare the item, have a special session, and then have staff prepare the item, or a commission vote, and then staff prepare the item. And then it would go to planning commission. Now that time frame could be varied. It could be a couple of weeks, and it could be several months. If the action proposed is preparing a master plan amendment, then we have to go through that process, and that would be the staff preparing the item would be the master planning process, and then it would go to planning commission, full commission, and typically in those processes we update you along the way. So the time frame here is a little deceptive because it looks like it's kind of chunky step by step, but there could be a large gap here between your action to say, okay, move forward with this, and actually the planning commission. The other thing that could happen is that we might need a budgetary item here, and so we would have the budget amendment process would be in this as well. Then the planning commission, is a recommending body on these items for you all. So the planning commission would make a recommendation, and then the item would come to you for full commission action at a regular planning and zoning meeting. And so that's the process that we've proposed. I think it does a couple of things. It lets all of us know the process and that we're on the same page. And if you all, sometimes I might have multiple commissioners come to me with multiple ideas, and they don't always, oddly enough, they don't always have the same goals and purposes or outcomes on the same topic. And so this process would allow us a formal way to move forward, gain consensus of the council or the commission, and then move forward.
Commissioner Walker.
I think your chart is actually quite good in its simplicity. You're right. You could have a lot of lines being drawn. It comes down to what we're really talking about here is not the initiation of a typical planning and zoning request. The commissioners are not going to initiate for discussion a special use permit or a rezone or the various mechanics that are what I would call quasi-judicial in nature. We're talking about policy. And as a commissioner, and I think this is true of all the commissioners, our function is primarily defined as the initiation of policy. Policy is an ordinance. It could be a resolution. It could be a moratorium on enforcement, but the policy aspect of what planning and zoning is about is our province. So I think while the Planning Commission can initiate a request for a change in ordinance that they encounter while trying to enforce or make judgments about a particular item, I think it's incumbent on us to initiate the process. And if that is the case, rather than have it be prepared and then sent to the Planning Commission without at least a vetting or consensus or discussion by either the standing committee and or the full commission, makes no sense. There's one that I thought we were going to discuss tonight in specific, so I will defer that until there's the time is right.
It is on the list.
It is on the list. But to me, the logical process for the typical is to go from us to standing committee to the full commission, refer it to the planning commission for their review, and come back to us for a final vote. And, you know, standing committee, perhaps a mayor would have the inherent authority to decide if a standing committee recommends an ordinance that it go to the planning commission and then come up to the full. But it makes more sense that everybody has weighed in on it and sent whatever the majority's will is to the planning commission. Because that's not a judicial decision that you take facts and evidence on in the way it is with the other planning commission decisions. It's simply a matter of policy.
Well, we might need to do some research in the state law on that, because there's really no distinction in the state law between a map amendment and a text amendment. The process is prescribed. Now, whether or not, and I don't know where prejudging comes into that and their decision-making process, but the statute treats them both kind of the same. And I don't want to, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I want to make sure that we don't put you in the commission in a position where you're violating the law to do that.
Well, you understand the conundrum.
Right.
As commissioners, if you interpret it the way you're doing it,
What?
puzzle.
Okay.
The problem is that nobody can initiate an ordinance except the planning commission or staff to the planning commission, and that's not staff's job. Ultimately, policy is our job, and if we feel a change is needed, we are the ones that are going to initiate it. Now, I don't know how you initiate an ordinance, unless anytime I'll write up an ordinance and I'll decide that I want this ordinance introduced, and we send it to the planning commission directly, with or without any discussion of my colleagues here, and then it comes up and we vote it that way. I've already made up my mind when I write the ordinance. I've prejudged it because that's what I wrote. So I'd like to see case law that says how we can make ordinances on planning without drawing them up and discussing them and then sending it into the planning commission for their recommendation.
We can work on that.
Commissioner Maddox? Can you speak directly into the microphone, please?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. My question was similar to Commissioner Walker, and maybe maybe the answer was there, but I didn't hear it in the quasi-judicial language. So, I guess my question was, as the standing committee makes a decision, or I see the arrows going either way, I just wanted to know who would make that decision ultimately to decide whether it went to the full commission for a special session or for.
Well, I can speak to that.
Yeah.
When a proposal comes forward, typically the staff talks with the commissioner who's initiating it to kind of see what their thoughts are about it. And then they talk to me, and sometimes I talk to the commissioner. And most times we kind of talk through sometimes the commissioners have an opinion about which way it goes. Some things are right in the wheelhouse of a standing committee, and we all agree, let's send it to standing committee. Sometimes it's something that affects all of us, and the standing committee is not really going to want to speak for the whole commission. They'd rather the whole commission deal with it first, and we can go to a special session and we can all talk about it. So it depends on kind of the nature of the event, and that's subjective. I would say it's entirely subjective. But sometimes people have a simple fix for something, and it just put it to standing committee vets it, and shoots it over to planning commission. Other times, we know it's complicated going in, and so we do a special session to kind of vet it out as a group. Sometimes we think it's simple. This is the most common, option C. It seems so simple, and yet it's fraught with difficulty. And so then we go to special session. So the way it happens, I would say it's fairly subjective, and it depends on the nature of the ask and the complexity of it. And usually the proposer, between the proposer, myself, and Mr. Bach and Mr. Richardson, we usually have a pretty good sense about where it needs to go to expedite it, right? I think that's the nature of how it works. But it is subjective. There's not a perfect flow chart. Though I think this is pretty good.
Okay. Well, we will, Commissioner Walker, I will work with the legal department related to the question that you have. So that internal request for action covered those of us on the inside. If an individual citizen wants action, for instance, they want to change a zone or a special use permit, they follow this typical process. If it's something bigger than that that relates to their neighborhood group, they need to work with their neighborhood. And then in the second point here, the neighborhood request for action, the neighborhood would work with the commissioner or the mayor or both to make an internal request for action. And this is, again, I'll use the 6th Street rezoning as an example. There were 2 different property owners working on a similar item. They had both talked to the commissioner. He realized there was a bigger issue here. They all worked together, came to me. We prepared the item for the neighborhood rezoning and moved that forward and along the terms and the lines of the internal request for action line that you just saw. And then the final item here is that planning commission action is required. The state law on all zoning matters does require the planning commission to act. So we all have, anything we do has to come through the planning commission at some point. And to Commissioner Walker's point, where that is in the process is a question that I'll work with the legal department to answer.
Well, and I'd like to say something about that because, Mr. Walker, I think you have an important point here. If you propose it, you support it. And I think the way that we articulate that is if everything that I think is true remains true, then I'm going to support it, right? But invariably going through this process, we see things or hear things, even up to the last public hearing, that could change our perspective on it. And I think the clarity we need to have is even though we propose something because we believe it's a good idea on its face, I think we have to say both verbally and in any other communication we have, this is assuming what I think I know remains true, but I'm not going to even vote on my own proposal. I'm not even going to prejudge my own proposal until I hear it all the way through. And I think that's a fine line of demarcation where we can say, this is what I think I want to happen. And I say that to Doug all the time. I say, this is what I think I want to happen. And Doug will say, well, no, you really don't want that to happen for these reasons. Or he'll say, well, here's what it's going to take to make it happen. So I think to be clear when one of us as an elected official who is bound by Kansas law makes a proposal, once we make the proposal and turn it over to the action, we can't prejudge its ultimate outcome until we've heard the public hearing, until we've heard all the input from all the stakeholders. So I think there is a way legitimately to nuance that because, we might write up a proposal and then we learn something at the public hearing, we think, well, that's not what I wanted at all. So we can send it back. And what happens 9 times out of 10 is we send it back to the drawing board for the 5th revision. And we just did that with the billboards.
We did.
And I thought that process was pretty good, albeit painfully long. But I think we got to the right result. And none of us, all of us, several of us thought it was a good idea, and then we even agreed to table it to make it better before we finally voted on it. So I think there is a way to do this that's above board and transparent, where we can propose things without prejudging its ultimate outcome. That's what I want to say.
Very good, Mayor.
And,
Yeah, Mr. Maddox. Commissioner Maddox.
Thank you. And I wanted to say to the area where it says neighborhood request for action and none of that, it says work with commissioner or mayor. I'd like to see that say work with commissioner and mayor. Anytime there's something I think is happening in a commissioner's district, I think the mayor and the commissioner should be notified in case there's questions that come from citizens and voters.
No, I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, it probably adds the fact that it's commissioners, because you always have a large commissioner that's over an area too that ought to be aware of something like that. So we'll try to be cognizant of that fact.
And the truth be told, when an issue's on the border, it's in one commission district, but it's close to another, we tend to err on the side of bringing more people to the table than less.
And there are times when the mayor would defer to the commissioners, and there are times when people come to the mayor individually, and then, you know, we work it that way too. So we need,
But the commissioners never defer to the mayor. Why is that?
that's between you.
We don't want you in our business.
That was rhetorical. Please don't answer the
Excuse me, I
question.
want this on the record.
I'm not-
We
I'm not-
we don't want you in our business. It's okay. We're not mad at you.
We'll invite you to the party when it's appropriate.
You want to start the next? So the other part of this that I wanted to go through is, I've had a couple of commissioners ask me about, well, what is it that you really do, and, you know, what's your real job? And
Are
so,
you really working?
so in addition to the administrative functions of running a department within the city, I'm charged with enforcing the codes, and I work with the code enforcement folks to do that. I'm charged by ordinance with interpreting the zoning ordinances. So if somebody says, what does this mean? I give them an interpretation of that. We do recommendations that you see related to all the applications that come forward, whether they come to you, the Landmarks Commission, the Planning Commission. And then I think maybe the most important thing on this slide is that, those first three bullet points give me quite a bit of power, but that power is all checked. And it's either checked by the Board of Zoning Appeals, the Planning Commission, or the Board of Commissioners. And there is a distinction I want to make in who does that and at what point in time. Under the zoning ordinance, when I make an interpretation, the zoning ordinance says that the Board of Zoning Appeals is the arbiter of whether or not I'm correct in that. And so if I make an interpretation related to the zoning ordinance and someone doesn't like it, they file an appeal and they go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and the Board of Zoning Appeals says Rob's right or Rob is wrong. On all the other planning cases, it would ultimately come to you. If we have an unplanned zoning district in their development review committee and the staff says you need to paint your building purple, and they said no, the ordinance doesn't require that, then they would appeal that to the Planning Commission. If the Planning Commission said, yeah, paint it purple, they still didn't agree, then it would come to you all to see that. So I think the checks and balances, you know, throughout our system of government is important, and I wanted to point that out as it relates to me. Additionally, I keep the county administrator apprised of issues and things that might be hot buttons so that he can convey those on to you all. I facilitate the development process within the code. For instance, today I had a meeting with the first auto dealer that's going to come into the Legends Auto Plaza, and working through the different issues with their proposed building and site plans and things, and how do you, not that you can't do this, but how do you do this within the code, and work through the timing and the scheduling of that. We had a great meeting on that today. And then, obviously, the topic that we just finished discussing, processing those internal requests for actions and the regular applications. Yes,
One of the
Mayor.
things, too, that I've seen play out a number of times at our meetings, our planning and zoning meetings, is Mr. Richardson's staff recommendation has sometimes seemed like kind of picky. And one of the things that Mr. Richardson has reminded us of is I'm upholding your ordinances. So if you want to change it, that's why it comes to us, that his job is to enforce the ordinances that we impose. If we think an ordinance is picky, we should change it, right? And we can. And so his point to us has been, and I've heard him make the statement in my 8 years, probably 100 times, that's your ordinance. So if you don't want the ordinance, then you can change it. And I think that's an important part. And we often, I wouldn't say often, I would probably say twice a year, go against the recommendation of the planning director, not because we disagree necessarily with his interpretation of it, but because we don't necessarily agree with our ordinance. And so we give a waiver, we give a variance on something for a particular issue. But when there is a variance to be given, I do think that should come from this Board of Commissioners. I think this is the body that should give variances. I don't want our staff member giving variances. I think we need to give those variances, because if he starts giving the variances, then I think it's going to make a much more complicated process. So he interprets the rules, he makes his recommendation, and if there's a variance, it comes to us, they'll come and ask us for variances, yes, on a regular basis, and then that's our decision ultimately to make. And so I think that's an important line of demarcation, where I've encouraged Mr. Richardson to continue to interpret our policies as they're written and let this commission make the decision on a variance. And I would say, gosh, in 8 years, there have been very few times when we haven't come to a resolution that everybody felt good about. Maybe wasn't their first choice, but felt good about.
And there are two variance procedures, one with the overlay zone and the kind of the technical part of the design standards that the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners do the variances on. And then there's the Board of Zoning Appeals variances that are the technical setback and height and bulk area standards that are, those issues typically aren't ones that you all come before you, but there are two types of variances. I want to make sure that we don't get those confused, because if somebody comes to you and the zoning ordinance says you have to have a 10-foot setback, you all can't say it's okay at 9. They have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. The Board of Zoning Appeals would say okay, and then you would approve the rest of their case. So just a little, some of the zoning stuff can get technical. If I get too much technical for you and what I'm saying, just say move on and we'll do that. Yes.
Commissioner Maddox.
Dan, thank you. I've got some questions on this because I've received a lot of concerns when it comes to the planning and zoning department. I want to know that when a citizen comes in to apply for a zoning change, etc., is he or she given an ordinance to which he or she has to comply with to make sure that they are doing the right thing with their project? And I'll say the reason why I ask that is because some people have paid the fees to get everything moving, and when they get to the bottom, they're told for whatever reason that they're not in compliance with ordinance, and so their project doesn't pass. But they paid out fees and paid to get different things done, but you know they're flatlined at the median process instead of the beginning.
Okay, we don't hand out copies of the ordinances. They're all available online. We do have pre-application meetings with everyone where we go through what they tell us their proposal is, and at that meeting, we don't necessarily have anything in writing from them. So we're based off of a verbal, sometimes we have a plan, sometimes it's a verbal what they describe to us, and we tell them, well, this is the process you need to follow. We don't ever guarantee anybody when they make an application that they're going to be approved, and we try and do a good job of telling people exactly what their problems are going to be when they start. We don't beat around the bush if we think that, you know, if this is the middle of a residential neighborhood and they want to come in and put, you know, an industrial building in there, we say, well, that's probably going to be pretty tough. I don't know if it's worth your money to spend your time to go through that process. Now, that's an extreme example, but we try and coach them and say, this is, other people have done this and been successful. It's been a mixed bag, or this hasn't been done before. And so we try and guide them very carefully in that process. And, you know, if I was really good at predicting, I would, you know, not be in this business. I would be at a sports book somewhere. But we try and tell them to the best of our ability that this is going to be something that people have done regularly. This hasn't been done before. It's been rejected every time before, or it's been a mixed bag. For example, with tow trucks in neighborhoods, that's a mixed bag. Some get approved and some don't, depending on the context of the neighborhood. And so we tell them that when they come in. But we do tell people, and my staff tells people, that if it is a questionable application, we make sure that they know that it is not guaranteed. And, you know, we advise them to seek legal counsel if they need it, or if we think they should have that. I mean, we really do try very hard to make people understand what the process is that they're getting into.
And that's a concern for me, because any citizen that comes forward that pays a fee to fill out an application, he should be given an ordinance or whatever rubric that he needs to be in compliance with to make sure that his project is approved. So the fact that I'm going to come forward as a citizen and pay money, fill out an application, whatever I need to do to make sure I'm in compliance, I think that should be given to me at the jump, not kind of verbally told to me, but something given to me on paper. And so that's a concern for me. And then I also wanted to know, what is the process time period for a citizen that comes forward and says, I want to do X, Y, you know, get a code change or something? Is it you know, 2 or 3 months? What's the total process? How long does it take?
So the basic process, if somebody wanted to do a change of zoning or a special use permit, preliminary plan, is about 65 or 70 days. Typically, they apply on the last Friday of a month. And then there's about a month of review where we review, give them draft comments. They have an opportunity to respond. We do a final draft staff report, and then the second Tuesday or the second Monday of the next month, they go to Planning Commission, and then 17 days later, they come to you all. So by the end of the second month after they apply, typically they've been to you all. Now, there are times when they don't meet that schedule, and especially when engineering plans are involved, we see delays in that process. We'll give comments back, and their engineer won't be able to respond in a timely fashion, or it takes more than one review cycle. But the process is designed to be 65 to 70 days, start to finish. And I can't tell you if it's 13 or 16 or 14, but about 2 weeks of that process is in our processing. The rest of it is required by the state law, because we have to, and the ECHO publication schedule, because the state law requires us to make publications related to zoning changes and special use permits. And so we have to meet that schedule. And then they say that there has to be 17 days or 14 days between Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners action. And our meetings are 17 days apart. So there are the schedule could be tighter if this meeting schedule was perfect and the publication schedule was perfect in line with the state law. But in general, we're about as tight as we can be. You know, there have been times when we get 30 applications on one day and we have to process those, and that just takes time. We do that within 5 days, but we also request about 30 outside agencies or individuals take a look at those when they come in from KDOT. You all get copies of the new proposals as they come in, the police department, the fire department, the conservation department. So there's quite an extensive net that we cast on those. And then if it's just a final plan review, then they end up Planning Commission, so they're about 45 to 50 days if you just have to go to Planning Commission for a final plan review.
So is it not normal for a person that wants to open a business who has to get all of these checks off? You know, the fire chief has to come and approve an ordinance. To approve the parking lot or something, or the square foot. Is there a certain time of compliance that each person has to go perform that task? Because from my understanding is that some people time is being pushed back because there's not a proper timing on the other people that are involved with making sure that the codes are in place.
Well, all of our staff reviews are based on, throughout the development review process, are based on a 2-week turnaround. So every time they send us something, we give them comments back within 2 weeks. Now that's probably true 90 to 95% of the time. There are times when we're busy and we don't meet that 2-week turnaround. But when somebody gives us a revised application, our goal and what I charge my people to do is to return those to them within 2 weeks. And then it's up to them to comply with those. And there are generally things that if the review comment is something that says you don't comply with the ordinance, we don't move it forward to Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners when they don't comply, because it's not something you can act on. You can't approve that when they don't comply with the ordinance. If they didn't agree with my interpretation, they could go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. But we don't, you know, I know what would cause somebody to want to go to Board of Zoning Appeals and not, and we treat those things very carefully, and I usually talk with the applicants about that and why I'm making the decision, and talk with them and how to get through the process. But if they don't meet the code and you all can't approve it, there's not much reason to send it forward. And so that's where a lot of projects get delayed. We'll have an engineer that says, well, I don't agree with that, and he'll sit on it for a month. And that happens. And that's not on me, that's on their consulting engineer, for example. Their architect may do that, or the applicant may, you know, have a issue with it. They don't want to feel like they need to comply with the ordinance. But we really try and do that. And on every time we send out a review, we invite them to have a meeting with staff.
And I understand we have quite a bit more stuff.
Yeah, and that's fine, but my hope, and I have a problem with planning and zoning appeals too, and I was one of the ones that voted no when we decided to make the Board of Planning and Zoning the actual Planning and Zoning Appeals Board too, because I don't understand how the same people who vote aye on a certain ruling can then come back and then look at it as an appeal and repeal their own vote. So that's still, and maybe I don't understand that right, but that's, am I not understanding that right?
No.
It's the same board?
It is the same board, but they don't, the Board of Zoning Appeals gets actions on appeal before the Planning Commission would see them. They go to Board of Zoning Appeals because the staff has said that you need a Board of Zoning Appeals action. So they would vote on the Board of Zoning Appeals would vote, and then later that same evening perhaps, or the next month, that case would go before them as some other type of planning case, and they would vote on it, on its merits after the variance had been approved or denied.
So, all right, thank you. You have more slides?
Yes. And Doug, you may want to lead into the next part as we talk about the projects.
Yeah, this is one that Rob had brought forth to the standing committee about a couple months ago.
January 5th, I think.
January 5th, thank you. And we talked about the different projects that they've all been in various initiative stages that commissioners have brought up as hot topics. They may be things that have been somewhat brought to us from neighborhood areas. Some are staff driven that we've looked at and said these are good ideas. So these were all identified as major activities or projects that would have to be worked through the planning office. However, they all come with a price tag because there's a fair amount of outside consultant work that we would have to get to do in addition to our own work. None of them come without any internal work, but some of them come with a large amount of external work. So what we were looking for was some priorities from the governing body to say, and this is probably as much to me as it is to Rob. You know, he could probably give you what he thinks his priority list is on this group, but as I go through and develop a budget, I'm not going to be able to build all these in for revised 2015 and 2016. Some of them, we may be able to get one thing done this year. We may be able to get a couple done, and it all depends. If you pick the zoning code, that's a pretty big, daunting one to throw into the budget. We throw in a couple 50,000 items or something like that, that's a different deal. So we've started working somewhat with the Rosedale Master Plan. We've received good matching amounts of money that have been submitted from KU to be part of that project, and we have internal work to be done with it, but it's a key one, and it hasn't been, you know, we still need to go through and build in the budget. So what I'm hoping, I mean, Rob can talk to these in detail. The committee really said, let's put this out to the full commission, see what they have to say. We issued that out to all of you. That's kind of an awkward environment for you to offer your opinions back on. So that's where I said, let's add this to tonight's agenda, put it on here, and we can go through. And that's where I'm seeking input from you all. And we have a couple different things we'll go through, but I'm seeking input from you all as to which ones of these areas do you think we should focus on first, and then I'll work on trying to see where I can get them in the budget.
I have a question. Major street plan, would that include Leavenworth Road?
Yes.
Okay. So a major street plan could be for any number of streets.
Well, this would be, so the Kansas state law requires that we have a major street plan, and our plan is somewhat outdated, and it tells us what type of street it would be, what the right-of-ways would be, because when somebody on Leavenworth Road applies for a development, we say, well, you need to dedicate another 20 feet of right-of-way because this road's supposed to have 110-foot right-of-way. Well, those are very generic, and as we move throughout the city, we see that some of those right-of-way numbers don't really apply to the development and what those roads are really being developed as or will be developed as. And so we need to take a hard look at our collector and arterial street network for the development process, because it really does create consternation in the development community when we say, give us more right-of-way, and they're like, it's a 2-lane road and it's never going to be anything but that. And because things have happened since the major street plan was done in the 70s, we know that they're probably right.
So for me, that major street would have quotation marks around it, because that's a specific thing, right? We
Correct.
have a major street plan
Right.
versus a plan for any major street.
Correct.
So, for instance, so the reason I ask is Commissioner Philbrook had worked in the Leavenworth Road Association about coming up with a plan for Leavenworth Road, for the redevelopment of that road and reconstruction of that road. Is that one of the plans in this group? When I saw major street, I thought, well, maybe that would apply to anybody's street, but that's something totally differently. So totally different.
Go ahead and speak to that.
Well, Bill has started that process with the two intersections that we just went out to RFP for design services on. I believe that's 52nd and
Yeah, it's 72nd and 55th.
okay, 55th and 72nd.
Yeah.
So Bill worked with the committee to talk about the street, what the street would look like, and as far as the physical infrastructure of that street, I think that is, if not settled, it's moving forward to being settled, and these intersections are the first implementation of that.
Right.
And so I don't have
It's kind of down a different, literally, road because he's.
Can you speak directly into the
Oh,
microphone,
sorry.
please?
Sorry. Because he's been working on grants and funding through other sources, and Mark and a bunch of other things, the federal and state, and to get this going. And so he has in his mind, and I haven't seen it on paper, his plan for laying this out. And Bill would have to be here to talk about this.
But they talked about the general, what did the road want to look like in the future as part of those public
Yes.
meetings, and Bill is
Yes.
taking that into account and moving
Yes.
forward with the Leavenworth Road projects and grant applications.
So the Leavenworth Road's not left off, it's just not a part of this list?
It's not part of this.
That's what,
The major street plan is kind of a crossover between Bill and I. I mean, and the engineers and what the engineers do and what the planning department does. We both use that document.
that one doesn't sound like much fun.
It hasn't been ignored, Mayor.
All right, input from the other commissioners in terms of priorities with this group. Yes, Commissioner Markley, and then McKiernan, and then Walker.
So I would just say, and I realize this is a chicken or an egg discussion, and some people are going to side with the chicken and some with the egg, but for all of these plans, what I love about the Rosedale plan is that there is a match and there is some investment from other parties. Because we can make a plan for, and I don't know which of these is least realistic or most realistic, so I'm just going to pick one. We can make a plan for Central Avenue, but if there's nobody invested in it except for us, we can sit up here and say, here's our plan. It's not going to get us anywhere. So for those, I would say the ones that have the match, the ones that have somebody else willing to commit some funds, those go first, which in this case happens to be Rosedale, but there may be, I don't know, there may be funds involved for these other ones as well. And like for Leavenworth Road, anytime we have leveraged funds, to me, those rise to the top regardless of what the type of plan is.
The one thing I would say about that is, like in the Northeast area, finding match money for the Northeast area, you might have a whole lot of citizens that are invested and want to do something and would help support that process, but finding an outside investor for that can be difficult. And so that's the only balance I see in our community, that, you know, KU Med is the match. I mean, that's an employer of 8,000 people that has
10,000.
10,000 people that has cash on hand to help, and it benefits them as well. We don't have that for every neighborhood.
And that's where I say it's a chicken or chicken and egg issue. I mean, if we make the plan but nobody comes to be involved in the plan, all we have is a piece of paper that says this is what we'd like to have in this community. But I think some people are thinking, well, we got to have a plan before we can go attract some people. So it is a difficult issue. But when it comes down to the limited amount of funds we have, if somebody else is willing to give us some of their money, for me, that's just the deciding factor.
McKiernan and then Walker.
Okay. In terms of just this list, certainly, imagine this. I really favor the Central Avenue plan and the Armourdale plan. Imagine that. But as I looked at all of this, the entire list of 21 items, I did have several questions, and I was one of the commissioners who said, let's think about this, and then I didn't. So I do have some questions, though. For example, last two items are long-range planner and then lead training. And if we pick the long-range planner, one of the questions I have was, does executing that early facilitate the completion of any of these plans? Is there some prioritization or some benefit that you're aware of that maybe we're not, that might drive something to go higher on the list? I also wondered, does the presence of a match necessarily push something a little bit higher up the list? Could we solicit matches for some of these projects that don't yet have them and maybe accelerate their position on the list? And then number 11 is citywide zoning code, complete revision to the city zoning code. And I'm not really sure what that entails, but as I look at that, I wonder, does the completion of that impact any of these other plans positively, negatively, or not at all? So I have a lot of questions that have just come up as I've actually reviewed this list in more detail.
Mayor, it may make sense for Rob to go through his last couple of slides so everybody sees that before we go any other questions, so we kind of have a full understanding of what's all this, and then we may want to come back to this list for some of the
And I just have
Mr.
two
Walker, are you
slides.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just have two slides. I combined some from what I showed Doug this morning, but we have smaller projects priority listing. I think this is, to Commissioner McKiernan, your question, this is where the long-range planner probably helps the most, the fastest. We would move through these very quickly with another staff member that could dedicate their time to this and then facilitate the other planning processes. And then
Before you do it, Rob, put that back up. So, clarity. You don't see a price tag after these. One of them shows that number, but these are all things we think we can do in-house.
Yeah.
So it takes some time. We got to go through and prioritize what we're moving the same way. But Rob's has limited staff as to he can't just say, everybody go work on these at once. They got to keep doing all their intake. But we'll get through all these items without having to add cost. If we add a staff member, yes, we get through faster.
But it might be a year, it might be 18 months to get through this list with our current staffing. So under staffing and innovation, I have requested adding a long-range planner. I think one of the things we can do as a staff that will help the community in the long run would be to be certified with LEED ND, which is the neighborhood design portion of LEED, so that we design our neighborhoods well, so that they're efficient and enduring for the future. And that training comes with a bit of a price tag. And then on innovation, there's a product, maybe two products around the country that allow someone to say, I want to open a bakery, and to Commissioner Maddox's point, then it says, okay, here's the zoning ordinances where you can build a bakery. It shows you the map of where those zoning ordinances, those zoning categories are, and then it goes out and hits the multiple listing services and our land bank database and says these properties are for sale or for lease, where you could actually go and have the zoning to build a bakery or whatever other use you wanted to do. And then we would have a link to our electronic submission process where you can submit your plans electronically through the building inspections division or through the development review committee. And I think that one's there aren't very many folks in the country doing this, and I think that's something that of all the things I hear from you is, well, and I have people call, where can I do this? It's like, well, come in and I'll pull up the zoning map on the computer for you, and we can go through all this, and then you got to go find a realtor to go out and do this. Well, this tells you the realtor to call, basically. So, I mean, that's a huge improvement for our community and people that want to do business here. The second part of the electronic review innovation is that we've done a lot and bragged a lot about our electronic review process, and it's somewhat cobbled together with Maui and what we can do outside of Maui to make that work. We would like to do the Maui upgrades that are available to make that all work within the system. And if there were funds left over, I've talked about the kind of the middle part of this, or the beginning part of this is, where do I find the property? How do I find a property? We've talked about the end, which is the electronic plan review process. And the middle is, if you're in Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, how do I know where to access the economic development tools? Where do I access the planning and zoning requirements and electronic plan review? And where do I access business license? And so what I've envisioned is a web application that would show the economic development tools and calculators. It would have the planning and zoning functions on there, and it would have the business license functions on there. And that would allow us to seamlessly go from the idea of a bakery. I'm in Kansas City, Kansas. I have these economic development tools available to me. I know how to go through the electronic plan review process to get my plans turned in and accepted and reviewed, and I know how to electronically get my business license. There is no one else in the country doing that. And so if we want to be innovative in the development review process, that's where I think we would go with that, because we would be the one that had that level of process out there available online for everyone to use, no matter where you were in the world, not just within our community, but within the world. So those are the items on the list. We have the large ticket items. We have the items that we can probably do in-house that might get funded with small grants through Healthcare Foundation or something like that. And then staffing and innovation that would be budgetary items as well. I'm sorry they're on 3 slides. If I put them on one, we wouldn't be able to read them. At least I wouldn't.
Walker.
Move it back, please. No, well, yes, I'll start there and then I want to go to this one. Go to the one more. You know, I'm elected at large, so all of these are important. I don't know how to say that one is more important than the other. Clearly, Rosedale is a vibrant area that has great potential, not the least of which is its proximity to Westport and the plaza. The KU Med Center is a huge employer that creates opportunities for entrepreneurs in that area. You know, the sign code, I've got people wanting, you know, certain kinds of signs. I'm not sure that we can't continue to make changes in each area of zoning pending $350,000 coming out of the sky. We're going to have to continue to address them, even if that means down the road we're going to have to make some changes to modernize them. I am particularly interested in the industrial site selection plan. And, you know, number one, industry tends to pay better. Number two, they pay more taxes. Number three, the raising of the funds could well be the first obligation of an industrial task force that we're waiting on.
Hey, I'm ready to go.
Well, then let's go.
All right, Mr. Walker is the chairperson of that task.
I told you, you need somebody with an industrial, I'll be glad to be a co-chair. But you need somebody
see
from
the dilemma.
industry that understands business, you know, in a way that I don't. Now, go to the next one. Now, did you tell me that it would take 18 months to get all these done?
Yes.
I can tell you right now, the vending machine ordinance, I'm not sure what 5th and 6th Street is. The used car dealer additional regulations is a special use permit requirement for any used car dealer that is not attached to a new car dealership. That would be true in every zoning regulation. That can be done in 15 minutes by amending the special permit use. That means anytime a used car dealer wants to open in any zoning designation, they still have to come to us for a special use permit.
And we just haven't had the discussion that specifically, and that's.
And I can also look at the vending machine. You know, that's an easy fix, depending on agreement on the fix.
Yeah.
Food trucks, well.
That's not going to be easy.
Well, maybe not. I'm just saying, I don't see these taking 18 months.
This is the important point, and this is where, if you can go to the 3rd slide. One more. Yeah, that's it. Is one of the things that's happened since 2006 is the reduction of staffing across departments in order to hold the line. And we've reduced non-public safety staffing by 20%. And that affects not just individual departments, but it also affects planning and zoning when they're going to the engineering department. It slows down the process of going to the other departments because every department has been reduced dramatically. So I think the issue is none of those should take very long, but that's if they had someone who was doing those things and not doing everything else. And I think that's the part where we need to be thoughtful about and I'll say this, for instance, the downtown healthy campus was a new master plan that we did. Well, it was 100% funded by outside sources. You know, we went out and raised money in the philanthropic community. That plan cost about $75,000. It was entirely paid for by grants. That still required staff time. Rob still was involved, had to be involved in that. His office still had to be involved in that. The grant did not pay the unified government. It paid the architecture firm to do it. But there's still time. Even those other plans that we want to do, even if we hire a consultant, our staff have to be involved in them. So I don't disagree with you at all, Mr. Walker. I think that this is the slide we're going to have to take seriously so that we can move things that should not take 6 to 9 months and get them done and get things moving. I agree with you. It should not take 18 months to do it.
But I will tell you that there isn't a member of my staff that is not working more than 40 hours a week every week.
Well, I hope that's true in the legal department too.
I hear the average has gone way up in the last couple of years.
Well, good. She was a lot tougher than I was. I let him go home. Are we going to discuss any of these issues tonight?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. We have about
10 minutes.
15 minutes.
All right.
No, we'll get a break. 10 minutes.
We gotta have a break anyway for them to move.
Yeah.
All right. It's no secret. Move that one back. No, the middle one. I'm pretty clear on where I sit with used car dealers. I don't think they ought to be allowed in any neighborhood, anywhere, without a process. They're not attractive. They take up little tiny spaces where they just have enough room for 10 or 15 cars, and they discourage other development. The vending machines. The vending machine issue has been discussed. I'm sure you're all aware of the arguments, the unequal enforcement or disparate enforcement. You know, are they ugly? Are they pretty? I guess it's in the eye of the beholder, just like everything else. We do not perhaps intentionally enforce unequally, but the result is we do, because there are plenty of vending machines all over town. And it doesn't take a very far drive from here to see them. Now, I had an easy answer. You know, you can have them in front of a grocery store that's 10,000 square feet, within 50 feet of the door, or 25 feet, whatever would be the appropriate, and nowhere else on the outside. That gives you a very defined limit of what can and can't be done. Well, you know, I know everybody's going to want to weigh in on vending machines. I mean, but if you're out walking, you're riding your bike, and I do have a bike, even though you may not believe it, and I want to stop and get a drink, and there's not a convenience store, but there's a vending machine out in front of my grocery store, which has been there for 34 years. And I've lived there 34 years, and they've never removed it. So I'm assuming somewhere along the line we haven't enforced it against that grocery store.
Can I get that address?
It's grandfather.
Well, it's newer than that. I mean, they've replaced it, but they have not. I mean, it does have, you know, healthy drinks in it too, for the few people that want a healthy drink. The bottom line is that we're not going to get to it tonight to discuss it, and in any meaningful way, I don't think, and give any meaningful direction to legal to draw up an ordinance. I am requesting that we do on vending machines what we have done over the years a number of times, and is declare a temporary moratorium on enforcement of vending machine restrictions until such time as we can adopt an ordinance. That will not create a situation where, okay, I'm going to go down to my little business and I'm going to put one out real quick, and therefore it's grandfathered. It will not grandfather it. It will not make it legal. It simply is a moratorium on enforcement of the existing rule. Because unless you're prepared to take them out of everywhere, it's not right that we not allow people to use them. It is a part of a business model for some businesses. The other thing, they don't own the vending machines. the individual business. It is a decision made by the vendor, which would be Coke, Pepsi, RC, whatever, or I guess they're the vendee and the vendor, to put one there. Pepsi is not going to put one in a location where they think it is going to be repeatedly robbed, or in a quote bad neighborhood. They're going to put them where they think they're going to sell a lot of merchandise. So I'm asking that we declare a moratorium on vending machines tonight, and I don't want this thing put off, you know, like the moratorium on banners on buildings for the last 15 years. Although I'm sure there are those that would like that. I would like to see something in 90 days in ordinance form, and I'd like to hear other commissioners' comments on it.
Well, I would say, I think we need to put vending machine discussion on a special session right away so we can hash this out and talk about it. I think there are multiple layers to it. One, I think they're a blight. I think our ordinance requires them to be in an enclosure, and so so that they're tucked in and they're enclosed so they look nice. You can't leave a dumpster sitting out in the street. You have to put an enclosure around your dumpster. I think you ought to have to put an enclosure around your vending machine. I also think, from a healthy communities perspective, vending machines are not the friends when we have one of the highest child obesity rates in the state of Kansas. So I'm not a big fan of vending machines, and I think we need to limit them. I don't like the way they look or what they sell. So I think I would be glad to move this forward quickly for a full discussion, and we can have an ordinance to look at, and I think you've drafted something, but I don't think it's, now I will say, I drink pop once in a while.
I'm just giving you someone up here. I'll have my Coke if I want it.
I threw mine away. So.
Yeah, thank you. So Healthy Communities Wyandotte, but I want to say, I think that vending machine is not a simple issue. It's not a simple issue at all. So I think we need to talk about that more before and I'll commit, we've been working this. This hasn't been sitting still. This has been working through the process. But we need more than 10 minutes to talk about vending machines.
Well, I didn't ask that we approve them. I asked for moratorium, and I'm making that motion.
Well, we're not making an motion during a special session. We've covered this many times, so.
No, Mayor, I would like you to tell me where in the rules it says it can't be done, because when you did that the last time, I looked it up, and it does not say that anywhere
Look,
in the rules of procedure.
This has been the procedure that we've been handling. You want to do a moratorium, we'll put that on the agenda for a regular meeting. I want to make sure, I don't want to have, our special sessions are designed for discussion, not for motions, and we've been very clear with that. So I'm going to rule that out of order.
Well, you've been very clear, but I intend to bring it up again as a new ordinance, and we'll see where it goes.
All right. Mr. McKiernan, you had something.
Well, I just go to your last slide, if you would, please, Rob. And this was another thing that I was curious was to get your perspective on what priorities might be. Because from where you sit and from where you work, you have a lot more insight into how easy, how hard, if one thing might leverage a second thing. And I think right here what you have done is you've effectively given us what could be interpreted as some priorities. That the planner might be able to facilitate quicker completion of X number of projects that are on this list. And so I think if you could give us some, I don't know if there's a way to cross-compare the cost of the planner versus the relative costs of the projects. But you've also, in these last two bullet elements, the internet for sale and the electronic review, you have suggested that spending that money might facilitate our processing in general, might facilitate general processing. It might bring us a monetary return that as yet we can't quantify. But does that potential bring it up in terms of priority? And I don't know the answer to that, but.
I think that that's true. If we had a long-range planner, they could be assigned ordinance modifications, and as Commissioner Walker said, we don't have to change the whole sign code at once. We might after the Supreme Court ruling this summer. They took a very significant case, and that might facilitate or necessitate mass changes. We don't know yet, obviously. But they could certainly be assigned these and other zoning modifications, and similar to what we did when we took on the narrow lot issue. I mean, we took that on as a smaller project. It was a $10,000 or $15,000 item. We made a great change to our code. So we could keep doing that. I had just heard from the commission zoning code change, sign code change, and If you do them in total, then they're a big project. We could start adding specific sections that we wanted to work on to these priority lists and small projects. And if we had a planner, we could do those. We could also allocate their time for the planner on something like this. They might be able to work on the major street plan or the Armourdale plan as a in-house planning project. Now, it might take a little bit longer than we would with a consultant, and we may have other issues that we have to work through, but you know, most of the time when we do these other projects, these are all done by me at home after hours because the business day is filled with the rest of the business of the development process and making sure that crank keeps turning for planning commission. And so I think that what you say, Commissioner McKiernan, is very accurate, that the planner would help. I think lead-in-D training will help us to prevent problems in the future. Now, it won't help, you know, it's not something we're going to see the results of necessarily in 1 or 2 or 5 years, but those of you that sit in your seats in 20 years from now will certainly see the benefit of that.
I personally hope that's manifest.
Well, maybe some of you will subject yourselves to that long. I don't know.
I'll wait for crazy.
The internet for sale application, I think, would bring us revenue. It would make it helpful for our citizens and outsiders. I think that's a good one. And of those three, I would probably put the other electronic review stuff at the second tier of those. We would have a lot to do in the others, but we may still come to you and say, we need a little bit of money to do this fix because when our software gets upgraded, we have to make some other changes to go with it. But I think that would be the case. And you know, when I put priority high and priority medium on these, I just guessed. If all we need on the used cars is add that as a line in the special use permits, Commissioner Walker's right, that could be fast. It's just a matter of getting it in. You know, some of these we just haven't had a lot of discussion on, so I didn't know where to put them. And this was a guess, but and the priority medium ones are the ones that I thought would take a little bit longer to develop. I know that I put the note on there about gun retail sale regulations. I know that was a hot topic in the last few weeks. We're preempted on that by state law on regulating gun sales at retail locations. But that's, I think that if we did put the planner position in and we started looking at the zoning ordinance and particular parts of the zoning and sign ordinance we wanted to change, we might be able to bring the cost down on these, but that was the first time I'd heard not to do them as a total redo. The sign ordinance, I may come back to you in July after the Supreme Court ruling and say, we need to make mass changes to our sign code. They may basically invalidate large sections of it because that's the scale of the case that's there.
Commissioner Philbrook,
Very quickly.
and then Kane, and we have about 3 minutes.
Before we visit the vending machines, if we could have some specific information out, you know, about vending machines. I mean, I'm not a vending machine user, and I know that may sound a little strange, but it's like, what do other communities do with vending machines? Where do they allow them? You know, how the regulations normally are. Give us some input before we wade into this morass. Thank you.
Commissioner Kane.
I don't know why Hal couldn't make a motion now. We make motions at standing committee meetings. We make motions during our budgets. We make motions all the time. So I don't know.
I'll make the statement. Would we have an action, a motion for action, we publish it on Monday, and the public has a chance to see it. So if there are people who have an interest in this, who might be for or against this motion, they have an opportunity for a public input, or they can contact someone. When we have something that just comes up because it occurs to us in a meeting and we make a motion and an action, then the public doesn't have an opportunity to know that it's coming, and they don't have an opportunity to say yay or nay that they like it or don't. When we go to standing committee, the public has an opportunity to speak to an issue. It's published, and they can come speak to it if they're interested. When we have something that comes directly to the commission that we don't go to standing committee with, we bring it we open it for public conversation. So we have a policy of making sure the public is informed ahead of time, has an opportunity to respond before we simply make a decision based on something that may have occurred to us quickly and not giving the public time to respond. So I think it's a good policy, and I think it's worth supporting for transparency for our government. So we are out of time. If there's anything else, otherwise, we are adjourned downstairs to our 7 o'clock.